Thank you, Nishtha. I think the experts have spoken. Yes. Now, somebody talk the language of a layman. Yes. So I will do that job of bringing up the language of the layman. Yes. You see, I've been dealing with issues of blue economy, climate change, generally the sustainable development issues. And there, in fact, we talk about the mismatch between our expectation as human society, our actions, and then its impact on the environment. And there are things which really worry us all. I'm happy today, we are meeting in the context of World Maritime Day. And the theme says our oceans, our obligation, and our opportunity. Yes. Now let me start at the end of this phrase, our opportunity. As a career diplomat, all our life we have been talking about development as part of our interaction all over the world, because development is at the roots of human welfare, which means we need to grow in all aspects of human expectation. And we know that growth would not, or development would not come automatically. It needs resources. And our only source of resources is our motherland, or the Mother Earth, right? So we have been digging those resources from this Mother Earth for translating our dreams into action. But somehow, somewhere down the line, we did not understand what was the reaction of the Mother Earth to what we were doing. Because that language, we did not have the capacity of fully understanding. We were doing something and the Mother Earth was reacting, and we were not able to fully understand the mechanism of the Mother Earth reaction to our actions. As a result, we caused massive damage to the Earth's environment. We damaged the land, water, air, biodiversity, you name it. So much so that when a scientific team came out with what is called the planetary boundaries, because the planet has mechanisms, and those mechanisms are enablers for life on the Earth, including human life. So they came to a conclusion of a sort that they counted at that point of time, there are 9 important planetary boundaries, which included global warming, ocean temperature, acidification, biodiversity, so many things, right? And then recently, I read a report that out of those 9 planetary boundaries, we have already exceeded 7 boundaries. Yes, we have exceeded 7 boundaries. And these are also called the tipping points, which then can undermine the planet's own capacity to manage its own systems, which means the planet may reach a stage of irreversibility in terms of managing those mechanisms. And then we see the symptoms. And we see the symptoms, for example, when we were talking about economic development as part of blue economy, everybody understood that while we have undergone massive development, but still a substantial part of humanity is still suffering from those gaps, be it poverty, food security, energy security, health issues, education. And as a result, the simple conclusion is that we have to further grow so that we have more resources diverted to those gap areas to overcome those gaps in the human development process. But if we want more growth, we want more resources. Now, the issue is that the land is already completely exhausted of resources, and I'm sure you all know about the Earth's overshoot day. The overshoot day when the Earth's resources are completely exhausted for a particular year. And I was amazed to see that this year, that Earth's overshoot day was somewhere early August, which means, and we have been doing it since 1972-73, which means since 72-73, we have been exceeding the planet's capacity for resources every single year by a period of something about 4 to 5 months every year. So as a result, there is a general expectation that the land is exhausted of resources. Of course, there will be some technological benefit in terms of the tech efficiency of resources. Understand, but it will not be able to give you the kind of resources we need for our future growth. The expectation is in the next 22, 23 years, the global GDP would double from the current level. If the current level is $115 trillion, you will add another $115 trillion in the next 23 years. That will indicate the magnitude of resources that we need. And the simplistic answer was that already the land is exhausted, but the seas have not exhausted. Let's go to the sea now. Let's go to the ocean. Why can't we go to the ocean? Because we thought, because we did not understand the ocean, or we did not have the technology to harness it, and now we have it, we can go there. Why not? Now, without realizing that while, of course, sea appears to be untouched by actions or misactions, but the oceans are also suffering. The oceans are suffering by way of pollution, by way of acidification, by way of loss of biodiversity, and so many other things. And now, for example, when we talk about the planetary boundaries, I will try to simplify it because I won't go into all aspects of those planetary boundaries. Say, for example, climate change. Now, everybody is saying climate change is an existential threat, right? And I think I have no difficulty agreeing with that. But if climate change is an existential threat, we need to know what are the processes which are causing that climate change. And then what are the main important factors which would either cause it or prevent it? Now, when I look at that, is the ocean not probably the single most important factor? Which, if mismanaged, will cause it, and if managed well, will probably prevent it. Now, I think that is where my starting conversation is. As a consequence of my association with blue economy processes, when I spoke to Anup for the first time, I think some 5-6 years ago, we have to understand, why is the ocean suffering? What ails ocean? And when you look at those reasons, the causes, it is basically the human activity which conflicts with the ocean functioning. Now, these are conflicts. When we talk about ocean activity in terms of economic activity, there are intersectoral conflicts. Energy may conflict with tourism, tourism may conflict with shipping, shipping may conflict with biodiversity. So many things are there. So there are those conflicts. Why the intersectoral conflicts are easier to understand and probably address, I am more worried about the conflict between the human activity and the ocean health. Because that is what we don't see. You see, for example, if a port is resulting in, say, a harm to the coral reef, we can see it. Or if the ships are causing a problem with, say, a pipeline, we can see it. But what we don't see is that how it interacts with the ocean health. And that is where the problem is. So the MSP document, which Catherine has really worked very hard to produce, is trying to highlight these potential conflicts. And then trying to spell out, is there a way out where these conflicts could be minimized? Now, that is where, Anup, your underwater domain awareness becomes important. Because unless we understand the underwater domain, we would not understand the causes for the ocean suffering. And if we don't say that, we would not be able to help the ocean prevent crossing those planetary boundaries. Now, that is where, for example, I heard, I know it's a very complicated thing. Acoustics, for example, is only one tool available to us. But it's not sufficient. It's not enough, because we need to understand, because what's happening underwater has some physical features, chemical features, biological features, and many other features. Now, each feature is so dynamic that it changes with place and time. And that shows the magnitude of that data, which we need to study to come to understand what are the causes of things that we watch or we see. Because those are the symptoms. Now, we are worried about the symptoms, or there are causes for those symptoms. The underlying cause, unless we address the underlying cause, the symptom we won't be able to stop. That is where, in fact, the underwater domain awareness or underwater, that platform which Anup and others are trying to develop, we will, you rightly mentioned, data in itself is of no use. Fine, it's data. What to do with it? Now, unless that data is integrated into finding a solution to a problem, it's of no use. Now, my worry is that, okay, something has happened and you tell me something has happened. But why it has happened? No, unless we understand why, we can't prevent the same thing from happening tomorrow. And that why is underwater domain awareness. That answer to why will come from underwater domain awareness. I know it's a very complicated, very, very complicated field. But we have to start somewhere. Let's start at maybe more simple parameters of ocean behavior and conflict resolution between the human activity and the ocean health. And in fact, MSP was started as a very simple process, where the intersectoral conflict was basically the objective. But today we are going beyond. It's not intersectoral conflict. It is a conflict of sectors with the ocean health, in fact. Now, what I tell my own imagination. In fact, I relate the human health process with the environmental health process. Now, what have we done in case of human health? We have developed markers, which means if something happens, we know that a lot has happened. That something will look very simple in the sense either a measurement of temperature or blood pressure or sodium or potassium or something else, right? Now we look at something very small as a marker, but we also know that there's something simple as a marker has evolved as a very complicated process. And that process needs to be addressed. And that is something we need to probably look at even in case of environmental health or ocean health for that matter today, right? For example, when you see a particular plankton increasing in density in a particular region, do we know why it's happening? Is it a sign of good news or it's a sign of bad news? If it's a sign of bad news, do we know why the bad news? Can we prevent a disaster from happening rather than analyzing the disaster when it has happened? Yes. So that is the very initial stage. MSP is just a toddler, right? It's just crawling right now. But I'm sure with the technological advancements, MSP will be able to walk, MSP will be able to run, and MSP will pre-warn you of what is happening, which is not visible to an ordinary eye. That is what the ultimate goal of MSP is. Avoid conflicts, mitigate conflicts, which are causing the symptoms, and then we are worried about them. So this is what I have in very simple layman's language. Yes, though because of my own science background, I know it's a very complicated thing. But we are talking about acoustics as one tool. We are talking about the DNA fingerprinting of another tool. We can do the chemistry of water. We can do the physical parameters of water. And then can we, I always say that El Nino, for example. Now, old time when we didn't have any technology, people will look at the color of the water and say El Nino is coming. Yes. Those were the indicators because with the temperature rising, the composition of the plankton used to change. And with the composition of the plankton changing, the color of the surface water used to change. And with that, they would tell you this year is going to be El Nino. Can we develop such markers, simple markers of complicated processes, and then take preventive action for avoiding the conflict so that it doesn't cross the planetary boundaries? Unfortunately, we have already crossed 7 out of 9. So I think with this, I will stop. I know there's a time limit. I have many stories to tell, but this was the simpler layman language. Thank you so much.